With the national event of the Gun Rights Policy Conference coming up at the end of this month, we get a chance today to catch up with the executive director of the Second Amendment Foundation, who have been partnering with CRPA in several lawsuits in California. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. That is right, we are taking a look outside of the state of California today to really try to get a picture on what the Second Amendment movement is looking like nationally. We're going to do that today through the lens of the executive director of the Second Amendment Foundation. That is Adam Kraut. Adam, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. But guys, before we get into that today, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. It really helps with the algorithms to get this message as far out as possible. With the elections coming up, we want to get this information to as many people so that they can take their Second Amendment candidates to the office that is necessary. Also, be sure to check the description down below. We've got some links there to a couple of important sponsors to us. We're talking about the Police Credit Union. We're talking about CCW Safe. These are organizations that are willing to invest in you and in law enforcement. We really want to prop them up as they are helping prop us up. So, Adam, let's just dive right into this. Second Amendment Foundation, you're the executive director there. Go ahead, give us a little background on yourself. Where is it that you come from in life that leads you to the position you have, and a little background on Second Amendment Foundation.
Sure. Being a lost soul with no direction, really, I guess, is the what I tell everybody. So I ended up in this field by choice in some ways, but also kind of just by lack of any real direction in life. I graduated college with a degree in political science. Wasn't really sure what to do, so I had taken a year off. I was working at a landscape company that was owned by one of my former scoutmasters. And during that time, I decided, you know what, I'll go to law school. And that was kind of at the behest of my father. So I enrolled in law school, went as a night student. I get to about it's a 4-year program as a night student instead of a 3-year for a day. I get to my last year and I kind of realized, I likely need to make myself marketable for a job. I need an internship. And that led to me emailing an attorney I had seen mentioned on a Pennsylvania gun forum who ended up being about an hour away, Josh Prince. And I asked for an internship at the law firm. I was ultimately able to negotiate my way into one. And that's where I ended up working for 5 years. He was the guy on that forum and pretty much everywhere in Pennsylvania that if you had a firearms related issue, he was the one that you got referred to or the name often came up. During that time, I also left my job at the landscape company and I started working in a gun shop. I started in the back casting bullets. That's what I was hired to do. And within a month, I ended up managing the shop and I worked there for a number of years. So it gave me some very practical behind the counter experience, particularly dealing with the compliance and ATF side of things that later, when I went into the practice of law, really helped inform that. So I worked in private practice for 5 years, representing individuals, industry members, everything from prohibited persons, FFL revocations, and a bunch of other issues like that. In 2019, I left and went into the nonprofit world at my former employer, where I started as the director of legal strategy in the same kind of space that we're in now. And I left there in August of 2022 as the vice president of programs. And I started at SAF in November of 2022. So there's a little bit of a gap in my employment. And during that time, I took on a case for SAF where we litigated the federal handgun ban challenge in West Virginia. And we ultimately did win at the district court. Right now, that case is actually up on appeal at the Fourth Circuit, and it's stayed pending disposition of some other cases ahead of it dealing with the Second Amendment. So I'm sure they'll do what the Ninth Circuit does and reverse a good district court decision. So, but that's kind of how I ended up here. And a lot of it was just really people opening doors and offering me an opportunity. It was never any ambition or plan to be here. It really just kind of worked out that way. And I'd be lying if I said I did nothing to get here, but it really was through people saying, hey, we have this opportunity and yeah, it sounds interesting. Let's go do it.
Well, I mean, that's certainly a nice buildup. Having a background in the firearms industry while going through law school, I'm sure helps in making you an effective attorney. What about Second Amendment Foundation? I mean, you've kind of already alluded to the fact that they've been in the litigation space for a while. What's a little bit of background? Where does this organization nationally come from, and also, how does it get to the point where it's at today?
Sure. So Second Amendment Foundation was founded in 1974 by Alan Gottlieb. The organization itself is based up in Bellevue, Washington, just outside Seattle. So, like you guys, were also stuck in the Ninth Circuit. And Alan had come out there a couple of years before working for Young Americans for Freedom, and that Young Americans for Freedom chapter that he worked for was actually dealing with the right to keep and bear arms. So SAF was founded in 74, and the whole idea then was to help elevate a case to the United States Supreme Court. Back then, if we ignore Miller, the NFA decision from the 30s, you really don't have any federal case law dealing with the Second Amendment, particularly anything that says, individual right untethered to malicious service. So the early days of SAF were really spent working with scholars and lawyers trying to figure out a strategy to get a case there, what was needed in public education. So law review articles were written, scholarly articles were written, and in turn, these things then start being cited in cases. SAF starts its litigation in the 80s. Our first lawsuit was against then Mayor Dianne Feinstein's handgun ban in San Francisco, which we won. We also challenged a total handgun ban in Connecticut, dealing with the same thing, which we also won. And again, kind of rolling through the 90s, more public education. When all those mayors started suing gun manufacturers, trying to put them out of business, SAF stepped in and filed a lawsuit against all the mayors. But really, the world kind of began with Heller. And since we're going to touch on Gun Rights Policy Conference a little later, I guess I'll just throw this in here. The first GRPC was in the 80s, and we also had the Legal Scholars Conference dating back to the 70s, which again was lawyers and scholars kind of peer reviewing all the work that was coming out of SAF in order to elevate a case to the Supreme Court. But I like to tell everybody the world kind of began with Heller in 2008. That's, of course, when, the floodgates opened to Second Amendment litigation, because you have a case that says, yes, it is an individual right untethered to malicious service. So the day Heller was decided, the Second Amendment Foundation files McDonald versus City of Chicago, which everybody knows is now the second major case that the Supreme Court has decided. And it's the one that incorporates the Second Amendment against the states via the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. It's the reason we can sue all the states and municipalities for their anti-gun nonsense these days. Since then, SAF has been involved in over 260 lawsuits, either as a plaintiff, funding someone else's lawsuit, or an amicus to another lawsuit, because, of course, we want to see people win. It's great when it's a SAF lawsuit, but at the end of the day, any advance for the Second Amendment is a win for everyone and the Second Amendment Foundation itself. Currently on our docket, we have over 55 active lawsuits across the country, and I believe last I checked, there were, I think, 17 active lawsuits in the state of California itself.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of going to lead to. I mean, first of all, wonderful result and product. We've seen so many lawsuits that CRPA has filed just here in California. All of those kind of a direct result as the McDonald case, being able to sue the California state government and the municipalities here. But CRPA does primarily focus, although we try to keep an eye and keep ourselves educated on what's going on in the rest of the country. Our efforts are primarily here in California. Second Amendment Foundation being a national organization, I'm just sort of curious to get the scope or the lens that you have. What is the Second Amendment rights push looking like this right now on a national level?
Well, I think you can break it into two categories. One being legislative, which I'm not going to touch on. SAF is a 501c3, so we don't do the lobbying, grassroots or otherwise. But from the legal front, post Bruen in particular, the landscape has changed, and it's kind of sad to say, because if you read Bruen, other than Bruen really diving into the carry issue more in depth, it doesn't say anything Heller didn't in regards to the test that's applied to Second Amendment cases. In fact, it just goes back and says, we already told you this in Heller. It's the text as informed by the nation's history and tradition. But because the circuit courts for 13 years or so had been just screwing that test up, it kind of reset things. So what do we get out post Bruen, summer 2022? Well, we got a new wave of Second Amendment litigation saying, here's the standard. The Supreme Court has reiterated it, challenging a lot of things that were already previously challenged, that the courts, through intermediate scrutiny, just interest balanced away the right versus the government's interest. You get a number of challenges in relation to governments looking at the Bruen ruling and going, oh no, we can't have people actually carrying guns. So yes, we'll give you a permit, but we'll say everything is a so-called sensitive place. New York being the first, New Jersey, Maryland, and of course California, and then some various municipalities in that. You have a slew of just interesting cases. So broadly speaking, you can kind of break them down in a couple categories. One, challenges that exist that were already brought prior to Bruen that are now being brought under the Bruen standard. So for instance, any number of our, I think, 8 assault weapons ban challenges. Some of those were started prior to Bruen with the anticipation that Bruen would be a positive decision, and then we could go on and litigate those cases under a new standard. Some were brought after the fact. Magazine capacity challenges, sensitive places challenges. And then, of course, you get a lot of courts now in the criminal context coming back and finding that these prohibitions are unconstitutional. So there was recently a decision out of the Fifth Circuit that dealt with an individual who admitted to using marijuana and possessing firearms. And the court said that, yeah, as applied to the individual, that prohibition is unconstitutional. Of course, Rahimi was recently decided. That one, again, a Fifth Circuit case where the Fifth Circuit said, yep, domestic violence restraining order, unconstitutional. Of course, we saw the result. The Supreme Court said, no, actually, it is constitutional, and, traced how they believe that was the case. So really, I think we're at a point now where the challenges that are being brought, whether it's in the context of civil challenges where, hey, there's this law we want to strike down, or somebody being criminally prosecuted and they're saying this is unconstitutional and raising a constitutional defense to a law. I think we're at a point where this is starting to shake out and we're starting to see the real results of Bruen. And we're also starting to see which members of the judiciary are interested in kind of sidestepping what the Supreme Court's edict was and finding ways around a very clear command as to this is what the test is. And when we say, you need to find a historical analog and it's the government's burden to produce it to show that this law is constitutionally permissible today, we see those getting stretched and blurred and kind of, judges reaching results they want to reach by logic that isn't exactly clear, but they somehow articulate it. And particularly at the circuit courts, we're starting to see that now as well, which is certainly going to be problematic. But all in all, post Bruen, I think that, as far as Second Amendment litigation and advancing of the right, restoring it and defending it, overall, much more positive than prior to Bruen.
Well, I'm sort of curious as far as the national landscape is concerned, like the geography of it. Obviously, we've got some pretty big contention here in the California courts and in several of the courts in the Ninth Circuit. Are you seeing that same sentiment throughout the rest of the country, or are you finding strongholds where specific areas are really using Bruen to uphold the Constitution, whereas in California we're seeing what I would categorize as some political activism in the court?
Yeah, the Ninth Circuit, prior to Bruen, every positive Second Amendment panel decision out of the Ninth Circuit ended up in en banc review, with the state basically saying, please, Ninth Circuit, help us, and the Ninth Circuit reversing all those decisions. Ninth Circuit still is a place where we're wary about ultimately prevailing. The Fourth Circuit is another one where you look at the decision in Bianchi, which is a SAF's challenge to the Maryland assault weapons ban. That case is particularly interesting because, it was up on cert prior to Bruen. It was granted, vacated, remanded, went back down to the Fourth Circuit panel to be reheard. It was briefed and argued, sat for 13 months, and then they decided, actually, we're going to do this en banc, the first go. And it took, I think, almost 2 years to get a decision on that. And of course, if you look at it, it's the same terrible logic that they used in Colby, the prior assault weapons ban challenge. That was an en banc decision out of the Fourth Circuit. On the flip side of the coin, you look at the Eighth Circuit, The Eighth Circuit just decided Worth, our case that we brought with some of our partners up in Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, challenging the 18 to 20 carry ban in Minnesota. And that one we won at the district court. We won on appeal. The government asked for en banc review, and the Eighth Circuit just denied it. So the Eighth Circuit seemingly is a good place. The Third Circuit is, I'd like to believe it's good, but some of the stuff coming out of there as of late, it causes question. There was a case, our Delaware assault weapons ban and magazine capacity ban challenge. We appealed from the denial of a preliminary injunction, and the court said that simply because the Second Amendment is implicated, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's irreparable harm. Now, if you compare that to the First Amendment context, First Amendment violations, is de facto irreparable harm. And interestingly enough, in the Ninth and Seventh Circuits, they have said that for Second Amendment challenges, it's an irreparable harm. So, I think from a circuit court landscape view. There are certainly some circuits that are more favorable, like the Fifth Circuit, great place to be if you want to fight gun laws. The problem is, unless it's a federal law, Texas doesn't really have any gun laws that on a national level would have any kind of real implication. Mississippi and Louisiana, you have the same problem. So when you're challenging bad laws and bad policy, you're in circuits that aren't always favorable. New York's in the Second Circuit, not a great place. You look at the First Circuit up in the Northeast, also not a great place to be. But sometimes you're forced to litigate these cases where they come from.
Well, and certainly, I guess that calls for some experience and talent as far as filing the lawsuits are concerned. I feel like we've definitely got that here. I feel like Second Amendment Foundation has that as well. I think the Ninth Circuit sort of plays into this argument as well, and I think it's pretty easy for Californians to at least constitutionalist Californians to feel like, California legislature, which creates laws, is kind of a cancer to the rest of the country. And as a result of that, we've seen a lot of organizations and businesses, not even just in the Second Amendment space, but just overall end up either staying away or leaving the state altogether. As some of these laws have been passed down, Second Amendment Foundation hasn't done that. And in fact, it seems like the lawsuits here, as far as Second Amendment Foundation is concerned, is ramping up. As far as partnering with CRPA is concerned, I can think of a few cases that we're partnering on currently just this year. You've got the James v. Maduro case, which is the challenge to the 11% excise tax. You've got the Richards v. Newsom case, which was the response to Senate Bill 1384's mandatory surveillance systems, as well as the May v. Bonta case, which was the challenge to the sensitive places. I'm just sort of curious, is there any specific interest in California from Second Amendment Foundation, or is it just kind of one of all of the states?
Well, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So I always tell people when we do litigation, there's a couple ways we do it. One is strategic litigation. So we look at the legal landscape, how it exists today, and how we want to shape it, and the best areas we think where we can take those steps forward to start shaping the world as we want to see it. There's what I call reactionary litigation. So we'll use post Bruen as the example. When California passed its sensitive places bill, which became May versus Bonta, the lawsuit that we're partnered with you folks on. That's something I would call reactionary. And then of course there's what I call opportunistic, where somebody knocks on our door and says, "Hey, I've got this problem," and we look at it and evaluate it and say, "Okay, not only can we help you, but there's a public benefit to helping you." It'd be nice to be able to help everybody, but we just can't do that. But when there is a public benefit that extends beyond just one individual, that is something that we can do. So California specifically, this ties into why GRPC is in California this year as well. But you look at California exports terrible ideas a lot of times, particularly when it comes to gun control. And when you look at any of the gun laws that come out of California, most oftentimes you find them appearing in other states too, whether it's verbatim the same or some other, mutation of it. And so our thought is that number one, California has a lot of gun owners, and you only need to go on any forum other than like Cal Guns, I suspect, to see that, like, why don't you just move leave California. Who cares? It's their problem. They voted for it. But the reality is that number one, you have millions of gun owners in the state of California. Number two, the landmass of California, like most of the state's red. If it weren't for the cities, which is true of most states for that matter, you guys would be Republican all through and through. Now, whether or not that means pro-gun is a different story, but you would have certainly more pro-gun policies, one would think. And so it's important to the Second Amendment Foundation and myself for that matter, for us to make sure that we are trying to defend the rights of individuals in places where they are most hostile to the Second Amendment, because at the end of the day, we're all Americans and you should be able to exercise the Second Amendment just as much as I should be able to exercise it here in Pennsylvania or, any other state where there are less limitations and that the constitutional respect for the amendment is higher, at least at the current juncture. So it's important for us to do that work in California. One, to help Californians, and two, to try to stop this crap from spreading to the rest of the country.
Yeah, no kidding. And we've been preaching for a very long time about how California legislation does get exported to other states and creates bad laws in other states. So it's good to get a confirmation on that. It's also good to see an organization from outside the state really understanding and putting in the fight here and helping so that those bad laws don't get exported. I got to ask, though, you got a big event coming up. Second Amendment Foundation every year puts on the Gun Rights Policy Conference. It's happening in San Diego, which, guys, if you're in the area, this is open to the public. If you want to see the legal strategy for Second Amendment litigation, not just in the Ninth Circuit, but really everywhere, Jacob, you should put the link to that, please, in the description below. You can check it out there. Chuck Michelle, who is our president, will be speaking at the event. But Adam, can you tell us about the event? Tell us about the evolution and the genesis of this to where it got to this year?
Sure. So as I was explaining earlier, I mentioned in the 80s, the Gun Rights Policy Conference started. And, of course, pre-internet, there were a couple ways to get information. One was in person, the other were newsletters and mailings. And I guess you could, in theory, do telephone calls or things like that. But GRPC was started as a way to gather all the lawyers, scholars, activists, and people who just wanted to be informed on the issue, put them all in a room and have the people that are on the leading edge of Second Amendment, either litigation, lobbying, research, present to people. And then you get a chance to rub shoulders with them in the evenings at a reception or catch them in the hallway during a break and talk to some of these people that, nowadays you may see a lot of online and think like, wow, it'd be really neat to have a conversation with this person. So the event itself is September 27th through the 29th. The actual presentations start on Saturday, the 28th. As you mentioned, Chuck is going to be speaking, and a fair amount of the presentation or some of the schedule anyway is very California centric, particularly because we're in California. And I think it's important to address those issues. So Chuck will be speaking. Costas will be speaking from his law firm. The U.S. Congressman Darrell Issa will be there giving a keynote in the afternoon. You'll be able to hear from some of the attorneys that are litigating various SAF matters as well on a number of issues that are also being challenged in California. We do have some other presentations throughout. The agenda, I think, is starting to be posted online. If it's not up yet, it will be soon, but certainly all the speakers are listed on the website at this point in time. It's free to attend. There is no entrance fee, so you can go onto our website at the link that'll be in the description and register. We just ask that you pre-register, so it helps us kind of account for who's coming and who's not. But we'd hope you'd certainly come check it out and hopefully learn a few things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to encourage you guys, if you're in the area or you want to make a trip that weekend, it's a great event. You'll end up going home with a whole lot of knowledge that, hey, if you're involved in the CRPA chapter program, you can put to good use within your community as far as advocacy is concerned. Adam, I want to thank you for coming on. Any final thoughts going forward here as far as litigation is concerned nationally? What's the landscape look like for you guys moving forward?
It looks like a lot more lawsuits, unfortunately. I mean, it would be great to say that I really don't have anything that we can file, because that means we kind of be at the end of the rope here, but that's never going to be the case, unfortunately. Um, the one thing I would like to just mention is we're very happy to work with CRPA and other state organizations. It's actually incredibly important to the organization as well as myself and Alan personally to have good relationships with various state groups and work with them. We're all better for it. So rather than us competing, if we all row the same direction, we'll make more headway. And we're very happy and proud to work with CRPA on a number of issues in California, and look forward to continuing to do that.
Absolutely, and that feeling is definitely mutual. We need to band together so that we can, in the most effective way, tackle all of this litigation, because it is a huge task. Well, Adam, I know you're a busy guy. I want to thank you again for coming on and spending this time with us. Can you go ahead and tell everybody where can they find you at?
Good luck. But you can find the Second Amendment Foundation on various forms of social media. If you check out Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn, it's at Second Amendment Foundation. And if you're on Twitter, it's at 2AFDN, because Second Amendment Foundation is too long for a Twitter handle. Thanks, Elon.
Well, thank you again very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.
Absolutely. And guys, if you like content like this and you want to see more, please, one more time, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. It really helps get this information out there as far as it can possibly go. We've got the elections coming up. We need people to make the Second Amendment as a priority when they go to that ballot box. And hey, maybe we'll see you at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.